friends, tonight we're going to take a look at the gun that surprised me the most last year, the Beretta 81. This is one of the surplus European police trade-ins that Classic Firearms sold for months, though I think they might be gone now. So on the surface, this looks like a fucking stupid gun, doesn't it? It's heavy, it's chunky, the grip is super thick and weird, the sights are small, it fires a dumb cartridge, it has tiny little old-timey sights, and the magazines for it are obscenely expensive if you can find them. Other than the price, what's the point? I bought it to add it to my Beretta collection. I love Berettas, and I'd wanted one of these for years. Maybe a vestigial love left over from playing No One Lives Forever 2 many years ago. I don't know. But my experience with guns from this era has taught me that, well, it might be more useful than would initially appear. It's like a TiVo. Having a TiVo is dumb. Who the fuck has a TiVo? And your friends will wonder why you have it, but it doesn't change the fact that the TiVo can still record TV just as well as it did when it still made sense to have a fucking TiVo. In the end, the Cheetah is largely still impractical and weird, but I've come to both love and trust the gun for defense, as strange as that might seem. I know, I'm shocked as well. I'm as shocked as you would be if you saw my TiVo. I don't actually have a TiVo for the record, but just so you know. So how is it that a gun that looks like it was designed for rich white ladies got the attention of some YouTube gun idiot who loves Glocks, Beretta 92s, HKs, and such? Also, why do all 32s look like they're designed specifically for rich white ladies? Anyway, it got my attention by performing. It was purely based on performance. This thing is a goddamn bullet hose. So what is a Beretta Cheetah and where do they come from? Well, the Cheetahs are a line of blowback, medium-sized pistols made by Beretta beginning in 1976. Supposedly, they were discontinued in the last few years, though I keep seeing new ones online. Those might be new old stock guns that folks are finding in their inventory. I'm not really sure. They also seem to still be making magazines, whatever the production status of the actual guns. And deep inside my evil little heart, I certainly hope they aren't discontinued. I love these guns, and I still harbor dreams of purchasing a new 84 FS in nickel. And yes, Beretta says it is nickel, not inox. Very curious. It truly is the pistol of kings, or at least Middle Eastern autocrats who demand that their starving subjects call them king. But let's not get hung up on the details. The Cheetahs were available in 32, 380, and 22 LR. In the centerfire cartridges, they were single stack and double stack versions available. The single stack ones are a bit slimmer, as you would imagine, and they feel pretty damn good in the hand. The 81 is the double stack 32. You'll see online alternatively that these were designed for the European law enforcement market or as a compact defensive pistol for the US concealed carry market, a market that was expanding at the time. And some misogynistic internet forum sages have postulated that the Cheetah was designed for women, as they always do whenever discussing a gun smaller than the 1911. I guess they're like thinking that their small, sinful little hands make it so that they struggle to grasp 1911s as they struggle to grasp science and economics. They were the first to talk to that goddamn snake, after all, and were thereby cursed to only carry Smith & Wesson airweights until the savior comes back. You know, in retrospect, they should have known not to take fruit from a snake. Looking at it in hindsight, it's just weird that that snake had fruit. But I really get sick of guys pushing women towards smaller guns. Women, like every other human on planet Earth, and it turns out they're about half of all people, shoot larger guns better than small ones. That said, the Cheetah could make an excellent concealed carry weapon for a man or woman because it's a nice gun, not because it suits one gender or the other. That's just dumb. The truth is, we don't know what purpose this gun was designed for, and you should be suspicious of anyone claiming that they definitively know. But the gun was certainly used by European police, and folks here in the States certainly carried them. I've spoken with several people who carried Cheetahs in the 80s, though the 380 model, the 84, seems to have been the most popular here in America. At the time, there were few reliable small carry options, and something like the 81 or 84, with a decent magazine capacity and excellent reliability in a smallish package, might have seemed pretty damn appealing. Yeah, those don't exactly sling 45 ACP, but hey, neither does my 1911 as soon as you get a little dirt near it. This 81 is the original style, with very few sharp edges. It shares an aesthetic with the early Beretta 92S, like the surplus 92s that were imported a few years ago. The later Cheetahs share an updated aesthetic with the 92 FS. This update is more angular and modern in style. I purchased this gun from Classic Firearms, so let's start by talking about that experience and the state of surplus these days. My gun arrived in amazing condition with the markings stenciled. The import marks are on the bottom of the trigger guard out of sight. That's a good location for them. I paid Classic for the hand select option and I received a gun in exceptional condition. Better than I was expecting, other than some strange gloppy adhesive residue on the slide that looked like Yeti semen. And like all Yeti semen, Ballistol easily removed the offending residue. This gun is beautiful. The single magazine that I received isn't. That's not the one that's in here now. I've noticed that these guns and some other blowback models, they require very strong magazine springs to feed well. These Cheetahs with unfucked up magazine springs will eat any ammo all day long, like every Beretta I've had. They don't give a fuck, there's no stopping these guns. But mine didn't work courtesy of a floppy, flaccid magazine spring. And at the time, you couldn't find other magazines anywhere at any price, nor could you find replacement magazine springs. Now Beretta is importing them again, so you can buy new ones at kind of obscene prices with very, very stiff magazine springs. So if Beretta hadn't decided to import more magazines, my gun would have been rendered nearly useless and this review would be very different. But we have to note, though I had good luck with Classic this time, every time I mention them, I receive one horror story after another from y'all. Too many for it to be a few guys who, don't have experience buying surplus guns. That's why I prefer to purchase from the Mosin crate when possible. A member of Discord and fellow YouTube guy, Tracy, he bought a Hand Select 81, and it is a real rust bucket. That's not hyperbole. It looked like Flipper the Dolphin carried it in his prison wallet for 6 months under the sea before Tracy got it. I would have been so pissed if that had showed up in my FFL. So I've put 1,400 rounds through this gun. Once I had new magazines for it, this became an incredibly reliable and handy gun with not a malfunction to be seen. I would have loved to have put more rounds through the gun, but 32 is very hard to find during the pandemic and very expensive. So if you enjoy my long-term endurance testing, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Ammo for these tests is more expensive than ever, and your support keeps me going. My patrons get access to the TGP Discord server, where we have all kinds of interesting discussions. Features. The Beretta 81, the Cheetah, is a medium-sized blowback, double-stack, double-action, single-action hammer-fired pistol chambered in 32 ACP. Double-action because, with the hammer down, the trigger draws the hammer back and then releases it. We're performing 2 actions with the trigger pull. The pull is long and heavy because we're pulling the hammer back against the pressure of the mainspring. This serves as a safety feature. All subsequent shots will be single-action. The trigger only releases the hammer. We're performing 1 action, and the trigger pull is light because we aren't compressing the mainspring with the trigger. The early version of the Cheetah has a safety but no decocker. In fact, I'll show you that. Safety, not decocking it. You have to either carry it with the hammer cocked and the safety on, or you have to manually lower the hammer on an empty chamber. We'll talk about how to do that, but it's always risky. You do it like so. Kind of put your finger ahead of it as much as you can and lower it very gently. This gun has a magazine capacity of 12 rounds. The Beretta 84, chambered in .380, has a capacity of 13. The 32 is smaller, so what gives? 32 ACP is a semi-rimmed cartridge. That means that the rim has a greater diameter than the case, though the rim isn't as huge as one you'd see on something like 357 Magnum or 44 Magnum or 38 Special. 9mm Makarov, like .380, is rimless, though as you can see, it's not really completely rimless. Rather, the rim is the same diameter as the case, so it isn't sticking out like .32. That means that the .32 magazine has to accommodate the wider rim, giving us less space for bullets. One has to watch out for rim lock with .32, but I shoot a lot of the cartridge and have never had this come up. Just make sure you load your magazines like a normal person. The Beretta 81 weighs about 21 ounces unloaded. Though heavy by modern standards, this wasn't so bad in the mid-1970s. The frame is aluminum to save weight, and the slide and barrel are steel. Of course, like the 92, these early models were made before Beretta began applying the Brunaton finish. So these have a shiny anodized frame and then a lovely blued slide. Looks very, very nice. The bluing is surprisingly great on every Beretta I've seen from this period. It's considering that a lot of these were intended to be service pistols, a lot of care was put into making sure that these looked very nice. Also, I think that aesthetically, I prefer the bluing over the Brunaton, though it is not nearly as durable. Brunaton does pretty damn well. The safety is ambidextrous, though the slide release is not. The slide release is big and friendly and definitely designed to be a release button rather than a slide stop, though I use every slide stop as a slide release personally. The sights are pretty minimalistic, though not as small as some guns from the era. They're just slightly larger than the comically small sights on my 92S, but still microscopic next to something like a modern Glock, or a modern Beretta, really. Outside of the light texturing on the grip panels, there isn't really any other grippiness. The frame is slick polished aluminum and is so polished it kind of clings to your hand, although when you get sweaty, this thing slides around all over the place. Later versions of the early model had kind of some vertical texturing and better sights. I've said several times this gun is blowback. What does that mean exactly? It means that when the gun fires, the only thing holding the action closed until chamber pressure drops to safe levels is the weight of the slide and the recoil spring. So when the gun cycles, the force of the case moving rearward must overcome these two forces to push the slide rearward. When the spring pulls the slide closed, it chambers another round. Let's watch the gun cycle. Notice that only the slide moves. The barrel stays fixed in place. The alternative is a locked breech gun like the Beretta 92 or a Glock. Blowback guns tend to fire less powerful cartridges, 9mm Makarov and below, while locked breech guns tend to be 9mm and more powerful, though there are exceptions to every rule in the gun world, as you probably know. With the Beretta 92A1, we see that the barrel moves rearward with the slide, until an internal locking block moves to open the action once chamber pressures have dropped. With the Glock, the barrel and slide move rearward together before the barrel tilts up, pushing this big lug down, unlocking the action once chamber pressures have again dropped to safe levels. You field strip the Cheetah like other Berettas. Push on this button on the left side of the frame while you rotate this lever on the other side downward. The slide will pop free from the frame. Take it right off. I said this gun is blowback. You may have noticed that unlike most blowback guns, the Cheetah's barrel isn't permanently affixed to the frame. You see that the Makarov's barrel is pinned to the frame. Also, many blowback guns have the recoil spring wrapped around the barrel, mimicking the Walther PP, like the Makarov. Though in practice, the 81's barrel functions as though it were permanently attached. This lug sits behind the takedown lever, which holds it in place when the lever is rotated up. Unlike the Makarov, we see that the 81 has a separate guide rod with the recoil spring wrapped around it. To the modern user, disassembly of the 81 feels more like a modern locked breech gun than an older blowback pistol descended from the Walthers, because this one really isn't descended from the Walthers, unlike most blowbacks. Once you've removed the recoil spring and guide rod, you can slide the barrel out of the slide, just like any modern locked breech auto. If you've disassembled a Beretta 92, this is remarkably similar. It's not too different from a Glock. Looking at the broad strokes, take off slide, remove recoil spring and rod, remove barrel. But we see that the barrel has no locking lugs. Just this one on the bottom that holds it in place. Moving the barrel in the slide, if I can get it back in there without making a mess, moving the barrel in the slide, we see that there's no lockup per se. It just moves freely in there. That's really hard to show without it on the gun, but you see my point. The barrel never locks up with the slide or any other part of the gun, with the exception of where the barrel is held in place. And that's how a blowback action works. I'm walking you through all this because a lot of folks aren't familiar with anything other than the Browning tilting barrel action, and I want to show you something different that used to be much more common. Though again, this is not the most common setup for a blowback. Most of those are going to be based on the Walthers. Looking at the slide, there's no firing pin safety plunger. Instead, it, like a lot of guns from the era and earlier, has an inertial firing pin safety mechanism. With this sort of design, the firing pin isn't long enough to reach the primer with the hammer down, and it's held in place with the spring. The hammer hitting the pin whacks it hard enough to move the pin into the hammer, and then that sets off the primer, because it's hitting it with enough force to overcome the spring holding it in place. The idea is that dropping the gun, even with the hammer down, it's not going to move the pin enough to overcome the spring because the pin isn't resting on the primer. This doesn't work as well as a modern plunger system, but it works just fine for most people in most situations. You've got to decide how you feel about that. I don't really mind it. I've never had a problem. The frame is fairly simple, like the rest of the gun. We looked at that block that holds the barrel in place. You can see how the takedown lever moves to open that channel to let that lug pass through or hold it in place. Like there, the channel is opened, letting the lug move through. There, it's closed so that it can't. Looking at the frame, it looks kind of like a 92, doesn't it? We've got an external trigger bar there, though everything is a bit shorter. We've got our frame-mounted safety, again, no decocking mechanism. The trigger has this little nub on the back of it. This is an over-travel stop, and it is necessary. There's still too much over-travel with it. Putting the gun back together is very easy, but it seems to give folks some trouble. I've seen a few people struggle with it, so I'm going to show you a trick. So reassemble the gun like autos that you're used to. Put the barrel back in, then the recoil spring and guide rod. That's all normal. And the recoil spring and guide rod, the guide rod goes down in this shallow notch closest to the bottom of the barrel. Make sure your hammer's cocked and put the slide on the frame. All right, here's the trick. Instead of trying to pull the slide back rearward and flip the lever like I see folks doing, push the muzzle down on your workbench until the rear of the slide lines up with the frame, and then push the takedown lever button and flip the lever up. If you just pull the slide back, the barrel stays forward and doesn't sit behind the takedown lever when you rotate it up to capture that lug under the barrel. So again, press the muzzle down against the table, hit the button, rotate the lever, and the gun is reassembled. How has the Beretta 81 performed? Well, this is one of my favorite surplus pistols to shoot these days. But more than that, it's one of my favorite pistols to shoot, period, regardless of age, because I found it to be strangely relevant even in 2020. We'll talk about that at the end. Let's start by discussing the trigger, because it's the least remarkable part of the firing experience. The DA pull is long and heavy, but very smooth. That's not surprising. Most Berettas have excellent trigger pulls and exceptionally smooth DA pulls. And DA pulls are supposed to be heavy. That's some baffling shit when folks complain about a DA pull being long and heavy. That's the fucking point, geniuses. It should be smooth, but I want it to provide resistance. That's my safety. Let's see it again. Very smooth. And again. Nice. Now let's look at the SA pull. There's some take up, as you would expect. The wall has some creep. I guess it's really more slop than creep because it doesn't have that grittiness that you often feel in triggers with undefined walls, but still it's just a little bit of slop there. The trigger breaks relatively cleanly, but the wall just is not super crisp. There's also a ton of over travel. You immediately see why that little nub on the back of the trigger is necessary. The reset is good, fairly short, very audible and tactile, not bad at all. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, not bad, pretty short. Let's see that reset again. Not bad. So the trigger is unremarkable. Not bad, not great. How about the sights? Small, but large enough to do the job. Fairly typical of combat sights from the 1970s, a small black notch in post, but pretty damn accurate. So what makes this gun such a pleasure to use? It's the firing experience. The trigger is fairly bland. It's buttered toast, neither good nor bad, but the entire shooting experience is caviar on toast, which I guess is good, I guess. I'm pretty sure I just ate old capers on toaster bread, but all the same, the gun shoots like a fucking laser beam. With a small cartridge leaving a gun this size, it has scarcely more recoil than 22. You can fire the gun as fast as you can pull the trigger, one after another, and every round lands in a 6-inch circle at 10 or 15 yards. And while you're dumping the magazine, the gun barely moves. You see the slide working, but it's just parked in your hand like it's locked in a vise. It looks kind of like when you see folks shooting blanks in a movie. The practical tactical minimalist and I have talked about this gun many times, and the phrase bullet hose is the most accurate way to describe the 81. You feel almost superhuman shooting it like it's a toy gun, only you're putting holes in things. 32 isn't a particularly potent cartridge, but if you can fire 3 or 4 rounds in a breath, maybe it isn't so terrible after all. And there's so little blast from this round. 9mm doesn't exactly rattle your teeth when it goes off, but there is still a small shock wave. If you have to shoot a 32 in a confined space, you're not going to have your senses rattled at all. Folks who don't shoot that often love 32 and seem to take to it fast for that reason. You know, the lack of recoil helps too. But the bullet hose performance isn't all of it. The gun handles like something modern. The magazine release is in the right place. The slide release is big and friendly and in the right place. The safety, should you choose to use it, is in the right place. All of my modern instincts have been built over nearly 2 decades around Glocks, HKs, newer Berettas, CZs, and shit like that. All of that translates to this gun. It's incredibly fun to burn it down with the Cheetah after shooting 9mm for a day. I'm a pretty terrible shooter, but this gun makes me actually feel pretty good about myself. And who wouldn't want a gun that boosts your self-esteem? This way you don't have to pay your mistress or your manstress to say nice things about you at dinner. You can say nice things about yourself. As time passes and I use this gun more, I had an epiphany. If it performs this well now, is it still useful after all these years? Yeah, I think it is. Let's talk about why. Is the Beretta Cheetah still useful? To my surprise, yes. I think it is. It's not without problems, so let's get those out of the way first. There's no decocker, and we have to deal with this safety lever. As safeties go, it's a good one, but still, not a decocker. If you don't want to carry it cocked and locked with the safety on, which I wouldn't want to do, you probably don't want that, you've got to manually lower the hammer on a live round. Again, get your finger ahead of the hammer. Yikes, though. You can learn to do it safely, but that is far from ideal. You definitely want to take advantage of that DA pull. That way you can not have the safety on ever. You can just ignore it largely. And that makes the gun feel even more modern. I'm telling you though, Classic sold a ton of these things. There are going to be a few dum-dums who are going to put holes in the floor or their feet or a treasured pet or neighbor trying to lower that hammer. It's going to happen. So just be very, very, very careful when you're lowering that hammer. Also, this gun is kind of big and heavy for a carry gun that holds 13 rounds of 32 ACP, counting one in the chamber. So we see that the gun is inconvenient, but do the benefits outweigh that inconvenience? This gun gets so many rounds on target so quickly, it is kind of astonishing. So I'd say yes, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. The 81 is sort of similar in size to the Glock 43X, another personal favorite, though the Glock is slimmer and a bit lighter. It holds 11 rounds of 9mm, counting one in the chamber, and shoots really, really well for a gun that size. One of my favorite Glocks, and one of my favorite smallish guns ever. I like the 43X because I only shoot it a little bit slower than something like a Glock 19. But it's lighter, so you have to hang on to it a little bit more. It's gonna be snappier. It's just a function of having a lighter gun. If the 43X, though, is fast, the 81 is fucking stupid fast. It's dumb how quickly you can get rounds on target. I literally can shoot the 81 twice as fast. My shots are closer together, and there are 2 more in the magazine. If I can shoot this gun faster than a small 9mm, you say, why would I not choose the 380 version of this pistol? Well, my recent experiments with 32 have taught me that, for me, 380 isn't the best option. Blowback guns inherently have more snap than locked breech guns, and 380 out of very small guns, much smaller than the Cheetah, can be somewhat unpleasant. The 84, the analogous gun in 380, certainly isn't unpleasant, but there is substantially more recoil than you get with the 32 for not that much additional power. Really, 380 and 32 both suck. I'd rather have the one that I shoot a bit better. And I don't just shoot it a little bit better. My performance with a 380 is about the same as a 9mm Glock. At that point, I'd rather just have the 9mm. In my experience, if a 32 is available, the 380 model is too much of a compromise. So I would rather have the 32 or just move up to 9mm. So I'll stick with my 81. This gun definitely has its place. There are problems. The gun is too big and too heavy, but it hasn't lost nearly as much utility with the passage of time as one might imagine. Final thoughts. If you're a Beretta collector, you probably already had one of these before they were imported, and it's probably in better shape than the surplus ones that came in. But if you're not a collector, you probably bought this thing to shoot the hell out of it, and it's an awesome range gun. Small caliber guns are incredibly fun at the range. But if you're inclined to try it, this gun is just as good for defense today as it was when it was designed. To quote Reading Rainbow, don't take my word for it. Give it a try. Run some defensive drills at the range. I think you'll be very surprised. More than that, we should probably all be more open to various defensive options. We should broaden our horizons. Go out and try something different. Have fun. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. I'll talk to you soon. Good night.